Khamzat Chimaev vs Kamaru Usman is gonna be an absolute banger. With UFC 294 right around the corner, we're getting closer to this co-main event that a lot of people have been looking forward to. As although the originally scheduled co-main between Khamzat Chimaev and Paulo Costa was cancelled, a lot of people, including myself, actually think that this replacement in Kamaru Usman actually makes this a better fight. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy MMA, I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it. Calling Khamzat's career so far in the UFC impressive would be an understatement. Ever since making it to the UFC, Khamzat Chimaev has been extremely dominant, as not only has he been perfect in MMA as a whole and also in the UFC of course, but he's been able to dominate basically each and every fighter he's fought. As the only guy that gave Khamzat a real test was Gilbert Burns, and even in that Gilbert matchup, I thought Khamzat clearly won. What we've been seeing from Khamzat has been incredible to see, but the question at this point is, why has Khamzat been able to be so successful at the UFC level? Well, in my opinion, it comes down to a couple different factors, but the first and main factor has to be his overall ability. Now, when you look at Khamzat out there, it's pretty clear that this guy's an extremely talented fighter, as he has a really nice ability to throw that jab out very effectively. That's clearly the best punch that he does possess, but even besides that, he also has an ability to throw the left or right straight, nice uppercuts, even some hooks at times, but mostly what Khamzat does out there is throw out that jab and throw the left or right straight. And of course, he's able to switch stances at will as well, which is also something that's extremely effective at the UFC level. But even besides that, Khamzat has a decent ability to throw kicks. It's not necessarily something he does all that often, although we have been seeing it a little bit more as his career has been progressing, but it's definitely an ability that he does possess. And in terms of Khamzat's overall stand-up ability, I would just say he's very clean. He's not necessarily the most creative striker out there. He doesn't necessarily jump out at you with his striking ability, but he has a really nice jab, he has really nice power, and he's very solid in terms of his stand-up ability. But obviously, besides his great stand-up ability, the main ability of Khamzat's game has to be his overall wrestling. As in terms of offensively wrestling, Khamzat is probably one of the best in the UFC, as he has a really nice ability to drive in for single legs or double legs and take the fight to the ground. And the majority of the time, once the fight does get to the ground, it's probably over, as Khamzat has a multitude of abilities once the fight does get taken to the ground, as either he can finish you with ground and pound strikes, he can move on and progress to other positions where he can look to submit you in a lot of different ways, and overall, once you go to the ground with Khamzat Chimaev, especially if he's on top of you, the fight is probably going to be over quickly. But even besides those abilities that I mentioned, Khamzat also has a phenomenal chin, and there's just a lot to like about Khamzat's game overall. Now, one weakness of his game that a lot of people point to is his gas tank, as in his Gilbert Burns matchup, he definitely did look a little bit tired, and in my opinion, although that definitely is true, he definitely was a bit gassed. At the end of the day, it was an extremely high pace, and when you actually looked at Gilbert and Khamzat, they were both extremely tired, and I would argue that Khamzat actually looked like the fresher fighter in that third round. So although it's pretty clear that Khamzat doesn't have perfect cardio, at the same time, I don't necessarily think the cardio issues that people are pointing to are as bad as people are saying. But now, let's move on to Kamaru Usman. So Kamaru Usman has certainly been one of the more dominant champs that we've really ever seen at the UFC level, as not only was he able to beat basically every single contender that came his way, but he was able to do so multiple times, as he beat Colby Covington twice and he beat Jorge Masvidal twice as well. But although he's been extremely dominant, he ended up losing to Leon Edwards with a last-second head kick, although Usman was dominating for the most part of that fight. And going into their next matchup between Usman and Leon, a lot of people expected Usman to win just based upon the fact that he was dominating for 4.5 rounds of that second fight between those guys. But as we saw, Leon did a really nice job at making certain improvements and actually beat Usman pretty decisively. And after losing to Leon twice, a lot of people, somewhat including myself, think Kamaru Usman is a little bit weathered at this point. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he's washed up, but he's definitely a little bit weathered out there, and most specifically, his knees are weathered. But regardless of that, Kamaru Usman at this point is still an extremely dangerous and an extremely talented fighter. And let's quickly look at his game to describe why. So in terms of his stand-up ability, Usman has done a phenomenal job at consistently improving his stand-up game to the point where it's at today. At this point, Usman is a relatively technical striker. He does a really nice job at leading everything with his jab. His jab is phenomenal. Not only is it relatively fast and he has a really nice wingspan with that, but at the same time, he has a lot of power with that jab and he has the capability to hurt you, as we have seen prior, more specifically in that Gilbert Burns matchup. But even besides that, Usman has a really nice ability to throw that left or right straight, as he also has the ability to switch stances, and with that left or right straight, he also has a ton of power, as we saw an example of that in his second Jorge Masvidal matchup, as he absolutely knocked out Masvidal really badly. But besides his jab and his left to right cross, Usman doesn't necessarily have that much besides that. As Usman tries to open up a little bit more and starts to throw extended combinations with hooks, uppercuts, and all those other types of punches, he starts to get less and less technical. But although his stand-up ability is a little bit basic, at the same time it's also very effective. In terms of kicks, he doesn't really throw out that many kicks, although it has been something that we've been seeing a little bit more of as his career has been progressing. But for the most part, when you talk about Kamaru Usman's stand-up ability, it's really centered around his jab and his left to right straight. But moving on to his takedown defense, this is also a huge strength of Usman's game, as Usman has only officially been taken down once in his entire UFC career. Now, I also personally think he was taken down in that second Colby Covington matchup, but regardless of that, taken down once or twice in your entire UFC career is extremely impressive, especially considering how long Usman's career has been so far and the type of fighters that he's been going up against. Now, of course, Usman also has a really nice ability to offensively wrestle, but in this matchup against Khamzat, I don't really think that's something that Usman's really going to be looking to, at least early on. But other benefits of Kamaru's game is he has tremendous cardio and he also has a phenomenal chin as well. But now let's look at the specific matchup between Kamaru Usman and Khamzat Chimaev, and let's get into my prediction. So when you talk about this matchup between both of these guys, they actually have very similar games. In terms of their stand-up abilities, they're both very simplistic, centered around that jab and left to right straight, and in terms of their ground games, they both have tremendous takedown defense, and they also both have a really nice ability to offensively wrestle. But with that being said, there still are a couple differences between these guys. Now, the first difference is speed. Kamaru Usman has been really good and really effective in the UFC with his power, but one thing that he really hasn't been is he really hasn't been all that fast. And when you look at Khamzat Chimaev, he also has a lot of power in his hands, but he's also extremely quick with those punches that he does throw. And a lot of people, including myself, do think that's a huge advantage in this match, as having quicker hands than your opponent, but also having a lot of power in your hands is just of course going to be a huge advantage, as you're going to connect on your opponent first. But besides that, an advantage that Kamaru Usman has is cardio, as although I mentioned before in the video that Khamzat Chimaev's cardio issues aren't necessarily as bad as people think, at the end of the day, Kamaru Usman has one of the best cardios in the entire UFC, and he really has an advantage in that department against virtually everybody that he goes up against. But I think a real determining factor on who wins this matchup is actually going to be the battle of takedowns. If Khamzat Chimaev is able to take Usman down relatively early in the first round, or maybe even in the second round, I do think he might be able to find a finish over Usman, whether you talk about a TKO with his punches or more likely finding a submission over Kamaru Usman. But if Usman's able to stop a lot of those takedowns early on and establish that jab and the left to right straight, I do think as the fight does progress, the pendulum is going to swing in the direction of Kamaru Usman, as I do think Usman will be able to tire out Khamzat if he's able to establish that jab and if he does stop those takedowns, because shooting consistently for those shots and not getting them is extremely tiring for anybody, but especially for Khamzat Chimaev, as when Khamzat shoots in for a takedown, he usually goes all out, and if he doesn't get that takedown, it's going to take a lot out of him. But overall, although I do think there are a lot of factors that are in the favor of Khamzat Chimaev, like for example his speed, his youth, the fact that the fight's in Abu Dhabi and Usman has to come over and fly over on short notice for this fight, at the end of the day, I still actually do think Usman has a real chance. And although he is a huge underdog, I don't necessarily think it's the worst idea to put some money on Usman to win this matchup. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening in this matchup between Khamzat and Usman. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Usman has a real chance to beat Khamzat, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy it, check one of these two videos popping up now. And until the next time, peace out, guys.